We are live, broadcasting only on onedealaway.com/live. This is Money Matters. My name is Nav, and today we have incredibly important news. Of course, we're going to take a brief look at the marketplace because things have shifted since last time we took a look, right? Yesterday, it started to kind of take a nosedive, and then it turned on the dime. And we're going to discuss as to why and what you can expect today. I am saying Green Day, but who the hey knows? We also are going to discuss probably the most important news ever reported, and it has to do with International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and it has to do with the largest banks in the world and the giant scams of what they're doing, what they're promising. This is going to take vast majority of our reporting today, and it's very, very, very important for you to understand what centralized finance that we are living under today is doing and what we all can do to protect our money and our wealth. You will see what's going on. You might have seen it already, but you will see it if you haven't already. This giant secret report that was leaked recently, a couple days ago, that I got my hands on, and I started to look at it yesterday, and it took me quite a few, almost like an hour, if not longer, to really look through it and read it. It's a very, very in-depth report, and of course, we're not going to spend a full hour looking at it, but we're going to take a look at it for sure so that you understand what in the world is going on, and also understand the reason why I don't trust the big banks. There are many reasons for it. This just highlights a portion of it. And I believe that this is one of many, many reasons why cryptocurrencies will likely take over the world. Because they say cryptocurrencies are used for scams, for money laundering, for illegal activities. But the problem with using crypto is that it's all on blockchain, which is publicly accessible, which means that you can track all these people and find them. When we go in and deal with traditional finance, well, it's much easier to get lost. It's much easier to transfer cash. And once you're in the cash, good luck finding them. So we'll talk all kinds of things. Let's do this. All right, and good morning. Yes, we had a slight wardrobe change. It was just a little bit too warm for me to sit in a hoodie. The moment I saw the display that I'm going to be sharing with you today, my blood started boiling, and all of a sudden I became very, very hot. And I think you will be experiencing the exact same thing once you see that. But first, let's take a brief look at what's happening in the markets. And here we are, S&P 500. As you can see, yesterday, this is the part I was saying, it started to kind of go and turn red, and then all of a sudden it turned out. And as you can see, S&P 500 is up slightly over 1%. This is Dow Jones is up by about 0.5%, and Nasdaq is also up by 1.71%. But what happened? Why did this change? Well, there was an announcement yesterday, or news that came out of the administration's office here in the United States that was talking about wanting to push the next stimulus check to kind of come out to people of that $1,200 that we received earlier this year. Not everybody got it. Not everybody will get it this time around either. Some people that have been deceased for a while have received it. Some people in Austria and around the world have received it. So, we were stimulating the world, and I don't know if we're going to stimulate the world again, but it is one of those things that they are talking about, wanting to push it quite a bit higher. And, excuse me, what also we have seen is that the President Trump had basically said, well, look, I have this thing called executive order, and if you don't push it, I will push it while I'm still a president, while he still can, and we don't have that much time. So if something was to happen prior to the election, it will have to happen over the next month. So we don't have to wait very, very long time. We'll see if anything will happen or not, but you know how the markets are. They move on the news. So what also happened is this. gold actually has gone below 1900. And if we look at the 5 day, you will see it was staying steadily, steadily, steadily until Monday. Then we had a big old drop Monday and kind of have been going down since then. So right now, gold is very much in the negative territory for a while. So we are basically now where we were, I don't know, in July, right? Late July. So we basically raised all of the gains from August and the first, a little bit of September, or first half of September. It's not little bit. September is almost over, y'all. October is next week. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Speaking of October, if you live in the United States, and actually my understanding is that this tradition is now spreading around the world, because I know my family back home is now doing this whole thing called Halloween. That's right. Halloween has spread around the world, and news has come in that Thanksgiving dinner is canceled officially. And but Halloween trick or treating is still allowable, and people are getting all kinds of creative. How the hey do we do this now? Will kids go out and participate? I don't know. It's going to be interesting nonetheless. Let's go back to the markets. Why not? So here is the futures. S&P futures is definitely up. As you can see, it opened at 32.98 roughly, and we are what, at 33.15. So this tells me, and same thing happens with Dow Jones futures. They're up, as well as the Nasdaq futures. They are up. So this tells me that it's going to be a more likely than not a green day in the market. And that is very good news for those that have been sort of suffering all of these losses. Now, of course, when you lose 10, 15%, but then you gain half a percent or 1%, you're not all that much up, especially if you bought at a top. So we'll see how the public will react, but we'll also see a lot of it depends on what's happening with this next stimulus checks and payments and all of that stuff. So a lot of things could come out of this next few weeks as we heat up into the election process. It's been pretty hot, but it's going to get even hotter. That's just my personal opinion. But we'll see. We'll see. You let me know what you think. Oh, speaking of you, I forgot to do this. Every so often I forget to do this. I do want to welcome everybody watching this live on onedealaway.com, where we broadcast every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, soon to be Eastern Standard Time when we switch the clock backwards. Remember, fall back. That's going to be coming up in a few weeks as well, if you can believe it. And I do want to welcome everybody watching this on other channels as well. If you're not on onedealaway.com, do consider joining so you can come in, sign in, say hello, and we'll do Q&A at the end of the show as always. You also, if you can, do me a huge favor, smash the like button, do subscribe, hit the bell button so that you get notified every time we put a new video out there, which is, well, just about every day, if not every single day. All right, we do have additional news. So if you are, anywhere from New York area, or have been around the country for a while and are familiar again with our American culture, has nothing to do with Thanksgiving or Halloween whatsoever. But you've likely heard the whole, like, we going Sizzler. We going Sizzler. Well, we are no longer going Sizzler. Sizzler has filed a voluntary Chapter 11 protection in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in the Northern District of California on Monday, and they are hiring. They have 107 locations across 10 states and have 485 employees. So they are just another cog in the wheel of the bankruptcies that we are seeing. And it's very, very sad, but also very true of what we are seeing. We're seeing restaurants still struggling to keep live, and we haven't even hit winter months, and wait until that happens. Because again, when it was started to get down here in the 40s, we had a relatively speaking chilly past few days up here where I am, where some of the some of the temperatures in the area actually hit 32 and 30 degrees, and we have even got the high 20s. So talk about cold, right? Where I am, we haven't gone that low, but we did hit 40s, and we didn't climb up more than like 60 degrees. So it's relatively speaking chilly. You don't necessarily want to sit outside and enjoy a meal at 40 degrees with the wind blowing at you. And we've seen already the number of folks visiting the restaurants and sitting outdoors drop, and that's just at 40 degrees. So I don't even want to think through what will happen when we hit much, much lower temperatures, which are coming. As they say, the winter is coming. But I do have good news, and good news is that Nike has actually reported a giant quarterly profit because their digital sales, online sales, have gone up 82%. Nike posted fiscal first quarter results that far surpassed consensus estimates. The quarter one earning per share 95 cents versus 46 cents expected, and quarter one revenue is 10.59 billion versus the 9.11 billion that was expected. Shares of Nike jumped more than 8% after reporting results, following a gain of 15% for year to date through Tuesday's close. Nike continued to gain through ground in digital sales. So this is one of the positive news that I could share with you, and so it's very exciting. But we'll see what will happen once this. My argument is that a lot of what we've seen for first second quarter, depending on how they're fiscally count their quarters and how they report and that kind of stuff. Because as you know that corporations and companies don't have to claim fiscal year to fall with calendar year, right? They can claim whatever year they want to start and end. But what I think and what I suspect is that we're seeing some of these gains. A lot of it has to do with that extra money that individuals who were unemployed received but are not receiving right now, and some of the stimulus checks that we've seen. That who knows if we're going to see another one or not. And that's those are the reports that I'm getting from individuals that things were booming and people are going out there and shopping and doing stuff. Well, now they're not getting that money, so they are not necessarily consuming as much. But then again, those are conjectural pieces that I am able to see. We'll see once the third quarter finishes, which is soon enough anyways, and then we got to wait for a few weeks for us to actually get some of those reports. So that will be coming up, and of course, we will cover it here on Money Matters. Now, the important piece that I wanted to share with you has to do with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Let me share the page with you so that you can see I am not making stuff up. Now, this is probably one of the most important pieces of information that we have shared on this show and that has been posted out there. And it has to do with the global banks and what's happening with what they're doing with their practices. So here we go. This is the article. And unfortunately, I can't get rid of this little guy. And I can't get rid of this guy. Maybe I can. Hold on. Nope. Oh, no. Nev, don't do that. Okay. So let's read through so that we can understand what in the world is going on. Secret U.S. government documents reveal that J.P. Morgan Chase, HSBC, and other big banks have defied money laundering crackdowns by moving staggering sums of illicit cash for shadowy characters and criminal networks. In total, it shows that there are 5 global banks, J.P. Morgan, HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, Deutsche Bank, and Bank of New York Mellon, who kept profiting from powerful and dangerous players even after U.S. authorities fined these financial institutions for earlier failures. So what is going on? Well, banks are moving illicit funds even after U.S. officials warned them that they face criminal persecution if they didn't stop. J.P. Morgan moved money for people and companies tied to massive looting of public funds in Malaysia, Venezuela, and Ukraine. The bank moved in more than $1 billion US dollars for the fugitive financier behind Malaysia's 1MDB scandal, You likely have heard of that, and there's actually a book. I believe it's called Billion Dollar Whale or something along those lines. It's a fascinating book. If you haven't read it, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And it does talk a lot about the 1MDB scandal. And I mean, it reads like a novel that somebody made up, but it's actually true, if you can believe that. And we're going to be covering a little bit over here, so you get slight insight, and so you'll get to learn about this character. More than $2 million for a young energy moguls company that has been accused of cheating Venezuela's government, helping cause electrical blackouts and crippling large part of the country. And of course, there's other folks that they have been, scamming money from. And here they also share confidential clients, and you can actually see. Let me see if I can maybe zoom out slightly. If this is a little bit better, if it displays, yeah, it displays. So the words are slightly smaller, but this displays much nicer. And this right here shows all of the clients and who is basically, charged with what. And here is basically who their clients were. People involved with corruption and embezzlement, corruption, embezzlement, corruption and fraud. Let's see, more corruption and fraud, more corruption and corruption and fraud. And you will see that these are some very, very potentially shady characters around the world. Let's continue reading. Let me make this a little bit bigger so I can actually see the stuff. Oh, that's not really useful, is it? Okay, we'll go with the smaller. We'll go with the smaller because at least you can read more of it. Tainted transaction continued to surge through accounts at JP Morgan despite the bank's promise to improve its money laundering controls. JP Morgan said it was legally prohibited from discussing clients or transactions, and of course, why would they want to incriminate themselves? HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, Deutsche Bank, and Bank of New York Mellon also continued the wave through suspect payments despite similar promises. Leaked documents show that FinCEN files include more than 2,100 suspicion activity reports filed by banks and other financial firms. The ICIG analysis found the documents identify more than $2 trillion in transactions between 1999 and 2017 that were flagged by financial institutions' internal compliance officers as possible money laundering or other criminal activity. The FinCEN files represent less than 0.02% of more than 12 million suspicion activity that financial institutions filed with FinCEN between 2011 and 2017. The cache of suspicious activity report, along with the hundreds of spreadsheets filled with names, dates, and figures flagged by clients in more than 170 countries who were identified as being involved in potentially illicit transactions. The FinCEN files offer unprecedented insight into a secret world of international banking, anonymous clients, and, in many cases, financial crime. They show banks blindly moving cash through their accounts for people they can't identify, failing to report the transactions. Authorities in the U.S., who play a leading role in the global battle against money laundering, have ordered big banks to reform their practices, fine them hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, and held threats of criminal charges over them. Headline making tactics haven't worked. Big banks continue to play a central role in moving money tied to corruption, fraud, organized crime, and terrorism. Now, I'm going to pause this for just a moment. We are going to continue with this particular article and continue to dig in. But basically, the banks are understanding that the system that they're operating is completely toothless. Now, here's basically what ends up happening. The U.S. government has kind of issued these guidelines that says, well, if individuals move large sums of cash, typically right around $10,000 or more, that a report has to be filed. And if you have ever gone into the bank, right, as a regular citizen, you're not, rich and famous, you're just a regular old mortal, as they say, and you have tried to kind of take out some money, say $5,000, or, forbid that you actually try to take $10,000 or more, they would start asking you all kinds of questions, including why are you pulling the money out? Do you really need to do that? What is the money for? Now, it's none of their business. It's your money. It's none of their business, but they are told that they have to do that. And the larger the amount that you are trying to move, that you are trying to actually, request to actually pull out the cash, the more problems you end up encountering and more paperwork that they will file. And if you pull out $10,000 or more, they will file this beautiful paperwork, send it over to their investigative units. The investigative units will go through it and potentially report the government that you could be a potential money launderer just because you are pulling your money out. However, the records show that the banks don't really do that for individuals who are looking to move giant sums of cash. And of course, what ends up happening? Well, if the bank violates it and there's proof that they have violated, in case you don't remember some of those things or don't know about some of those things, we're definitely going to cover that here today. We're not going to go into every single case, but we're going to go into quite a few different cases, that for you to be able to see what ends up happening is that they do end up being fined. But while it sounds like a lot of money to you and I, right, when the bank gets fined, like say 22 million dollars or whatever, or $2 billion, but if their income from the transaction on that 2 billion was 22 billion, well, that's just the cost of doing business. That's just the cost of doing business, and they don't really care. So what they go and say, I'm sorry, I was bad. Oh, bad little me, bad little me. We'll never do this again. I'm a changed man. I'm a changed man, right? And if you've ever been in a relationship with a changed person, right, who might have cheated or done something and they're changed now, it's fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And shame on all of us because we have been fooled more than once. Let's continue of what's going on. So top 10 banks by reported amount in FinCEN files. Total amount disclosed to banks in suspicious activity reports found in FinCEN files. Deutsche Bank wins at $1.3 trillion. JP Morgan is in second place with half a trillion. Standard Chartered is third place at 166 billion, right? This is billion. Bank of New York Mellon 64 billion, Barclays at 21 billion, Societe Generale at 8.5 billion, HSBC at 4.5, State Street Corporations at only 2 billion, Commerzbank AG, also German bank, 1.7, and China Investment Corporation only 1.3. Come on, China. I'm going to need you to pick it up with these illicit activities if you want to keep up in the world. In 2012, London-based HSBC, the largest bank in Europe, signed a deferred prosecution deal and admitted it had laundered at least $881 million for Latin American drug cartels. HSBC paid $1.9 billion and the government agreed to put criminal charges against the bank on hold and dismiss them after 5 years if HSBC kept its pledge to aggressively fight the flow of dirty money. HSBC said, yes, we're changed now. We're different. We made mistakes. We've learned from them. We are different. But what happened is that the files show that they continued to move money for questionable characters, and in December of 2017, and they basically went out and said, we lived up to all of our commitments. However, the files show that that is not true. They have continued to do stuff, just were a little bit smarter about how they were doing stuff. Banks in FinCEN files regularly process transactions to companies registered in so-called secrecy jurisdiction and did so without knowing the ultimate owner of the account. Now, one of the things, if you know anything about central banking and that kind of stuff, is that they have this thing called KYC. If you are anywhere in the crypto world, you understand what KYC is, but basically means know your customer. As a business, all of us, if we're in a business, we have a rule that well, it's not our rule, it's the government rule that says you got to know who your customer is. You have to understand of collect some information about them, of like the, banks and information where they live and where's the money going to and what is it for and all of those different things. And that's why a lot of these centralized exchanges, when it comes to the world of crypto, for example, when they go in and you want to go and buy stuff, you have to provide all of this information, right? Like your name, your mailing address. You have to snap a photo of your government-issued photo ID, send them a photo of your little face, all those different things because they have to follow that stuff. Banks are under the same scrutiny. However, the records show that they have no clue because you can go out there into what are known as the corporate havens. So, for example, a lot of the countries in the sort of uh, um, the central islands for south of U.S., for example, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, that kind of stuff, comes to mind as the financial havens where you can go in and start a company. And a lot of times, there's a lot of good reasons why you would do that because taxation is much better for the company. But it also allows for shady characters to do some, well, shady business. And that's exactly what they're talking about here. Now, question comes in of how long does it take the banks to file a suspicious activity report? The median number of days it took the top five banks by transaction amount in FinCEN files to file a report from the time transaction took place and the time it was reported to FinCEN. Barclays, 1,205 days. You divide that by 365, and you can see how long it takes. Basically, 2 years. JP Morgan, about year and a half, or 519 days. Standard Chartered, 426 days. Bank of New York Mellon, 210. Way under a year. Deutsche Bank, 136. Now, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime indicates that 2.4 trillion of dollars in illicit funds are laundered each year, and this is equivalent to nearly 2.7% of all goods and services produced annually in the world. But the agency estimates that authorities detect less than 1% of the world's dirty money. So what we're seeing here is basically peanuts in comparison to what actually happens. So even this report, as huge as it is, as large of the amount as this stuff is, it's basically nothing because we only catch a small portion anyway. So who knows how much more have we has happened that we just don't even know about. So for some financial institutions, the problem is another bank. And, they're using some of the stories of what has happened. So one of it is a bombing in Jerusalem where, basically individual blew up the bus and, hurt a lot of people. And it turns out that this particular individual had used a local bank who then worked with some of these large banks, one of these top five banks, that Standard Chartered sounds like in this particular case, to work with them to kind of get access to the US dollars that then end up being given to these individuals who then can finance their basically them doing bad stuff to other individuals. So this goes in and talks about all of this stuff. Now, they're talking here about rewards and risk. And so why do banks move suspects' money? Because it's profitable. JP Morgan, for example, scored an estimate $500 million in revenue by serving as a chief banker to Bernie Madoff. Remember that guy? Yeah, that's right. So he had this largest Ponzi scheme that ran for forever. Bernie, of course, had been charged and arrested, and JP Morgan paid 88.3 million dollars in 2011 to settle. However, uh, um, with everybody, and then in January 2014, the bank paid 2.6 billion to its agencies to settle, and but it was making 22 billion in profits for the year. So again, if you were to make 22 billion but had to pay 2.6 billion, well, that's that's 10%. That's just kind of like taxation. It's a cost of doing business. JP Morgan, of course, continued to do stuff with shady characters, and Jolo is one of those individuals. Remember one MDB fund? Well, that's actually who Jolo is. He's a quote-unquote financier. That's what he presented himself. And he basically embezzled more than $4.5 billion from Malaysian Economic Development Fund. Of course, he was working with the Malaysian government. This whole scam imploded a few years back. And yeah, it is the book called Billion Dollar Whale if you want to read more about it. And I highly, highly recommend you do. The book is absolutely out of this world, even though it's a real life character, real life everything. It reads like a crime novel. So you definitely want to check it out. Confidential clients, here it is. Low. Joe Low, fugitive financier accused by Malaysian American authorities of embezzling with others more than $4.5 billion from Malaysia Investment Development Fund called One Malaysia Development Berhad, or 1MDB. From 2009 to 2015, Lowe laundered money through Goldman Sachs and other banks in the United States, Switzerland, Singapore, and Luxembourg, according to U.S. and other countries' authorities. He allegedly used the looted money to engage in extravagant spending spree, acquiring one-of-a-kind artworks, luxury real estate, and yachts, authorities say. And of course, he was throwing all kinds of parties where some of the largest names that you are very, very familiar with have attended. So again, Billion Dollar Whale is the book if you want to learn more about this entire story. JP Morgan also moved money for companies and people tied to corruption scandals in Venezuela that have helped create one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Way to go, JP Morgan Chase. Now, boss of bosses, this has to do with Russian mafia, actually, if you can believe it. So, one of the secret files also shows banks handling cross-border transactions that have little idea who they're dealing with. The case of a mysterious shell company called ABSI Enterprises. ABSI sent and received more than $1 billion in transactions through JP Morgan between January 2010 and July 2015. A direct bank accounts with JP Morgan, which ABSI closed in 2013, and through so-called correspondent banking arrangements in which a bank with significant U.S. operations such as JP Morgan allows foreign banks to process U.S. dollars transactions through its own accounts. Compliance watchdog-based bank Columbus, Ohio, operations hub decided to try to figure out ABSI actual owner and have basically connected it potentially, allegedly, with the boss of bosses of Russian mafia groups. ABSI operated as a shell company in Cyprus, amongst other places as well, and it sounds like was more likely than not used to basically just launder dirty money. An elite group of mostly U.S. and European banks with large operations in New York pocket fees for performing this trick, drawing on their privileged access to the U.S. Federal Reserve. So here is kind of what ends up happening, and I think that this, right now, what's happening with super low rates and Fed kind of supporting all of the big banks, that these potential illicit activities are happening as we speak. As we speak, and probably even larger. Because when you can go out there and get money basically for free that you may or may not even ever even have to pay back, and now you have access to all of these funds, then you establish your network of the banks, kind of like a business, right, of who you work the business with. Then you end up transferring money back and forth, and you have access to the free money. So, of course, everybody wants to be a friend, because if I had free money and was given to you, of course you're going to want to be my friend, whether for real or just because you can benefit. And now we can do the transactions. And what ends up happening is some of these large banks say, you know what, yeah, sure, we'll do this, but it's going to cost you XYZ. So they pocket this money from these illicit activities. And, so for them, it makes sense of why they would do it. And then, of course, if they get caught, they pay a small fine, a small fee for doing business, and then they continue doing that stuff. While banks are empowered to stop a transaction if it appears to be shady, they're not necessarily required to do so. Ah, very interesting. They simply have to file a suspicious activity report with FinCEN. So they don't necessarily have to do much of anything. They just kind of file a report. But it sounds like there's no timeline as well, so you could wait a few years. Well, by the time you report it 2 years later, that money is long freaking gone. Good luck finding it. And of course, here it is, right here. It says, well, long gone. The secret documents show banks frequently file suspicious activity reports only after a transaction or customer becomes subject of negative news articles or a government inquiry, usually after the money is long gone. So what ends up happening is that they basically have this back of the office individuals. Remember, you try to draw the money out. They kind of put in this little report. They send it to their back office. Well, the back office basically goes over to the files and to the compliance officers and so on. And so they don't know, they don't know you or me from Adam, right? So what they do is they resort to basic Google searches. If you don't believe me, it's right over here. Banks often resort to basic Google searches to try to learn who's behind transfer involving hundreds of millions of dollars. And only thing that can tip them is if bad news shows up and says, hey, so-and-so, like Jolo, for example, this, and they were like, ooh, okay, this character sounds to be important. Maybe we should do something about it, right? But at this point, it's too late. Julia Knight and Ashuman Chandra claim in the suit that they were forced out of management job at the bank after they learned that they had cooperated with an FBI probe into transfers of money that Standard Chartered had published through U.S. sanctioned entities from Iran, Libya, Sudan, and Myanmar. So what happened is that these two individuals, Julian and Ashuman, basically worked at the Standard Chartered, and they decided, hey, wait a minute, something weird is happening here. We're going to work with FBI. And what do they do? Well, they're supposed to protect all of this stuff and collaborate with the government. Instead, they basically fired these two individuals and basically washed their hands so they can continue doing the business. So very, very interesting. And when I say shady, talk about shady characters, but let's talk about the shady freaking banks. So there's stories about Ukraine and kind of what's been going on over there, and there's just a long, long, long list of problems of what's been going on, and I will link to everybody watching this live in the file. Hold on, let me do that right now. So if you want to read it, you absolutely can. So there you go. You actually have a link of where you can find this full document if you want to read it. It is very, very long, but incredibly good. In following a transfer, correspondent bank, a simpler case, deducts the amount of from the accounts of sending bank and credits the account to the receiving bank, taking a fee. By granting foreign banks accept access to US dollars, JP Morgan was opening the system's door to their customers, including anonymous shell companies, which was one of them was used here in this particular case. A later probe would also find that 90% of the customers of this bank that the JP Morgan Chase was working with were also deemed high risk by this bank itself. But that didn't stop them in doing stuff. Of course, when this all kind of started to come out, JP Morgan sort of stepped out, and by the end of 2014, it terminated corresponding accounts with about 500 foreign banks. So here is a quote from Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Quote, every company makes a mistake, and we've made a number of them, but the hallmark of a great company is what it does in response. Now, of course, in his letter that he did, he wrote this in a cover letter to, shareholders and so on, but he didn't mention the Ukraine, the Latvia, the ABLV, Novarex, all of these different problems of how they have financed all of these different things that they probably shouldn't have touched and should have reported right away. Nor did he mention shortly before the pullout, U.S. regulations had issued a scathing appraisal of J.P. Morgan's money laundering safeguards and ordered the bank to review its correspondent banking practices. By then, Ukraine's treasury had been looted, J.P. Morgan's pocketed, and they walked away and moved on to the next thing. Now, of course, this just continues with more and more and more of the shady stuff. But what they're saying here in the investigation shows that 5 of the banks that appear most often in FinCEN files are HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, and Bank of New York Mellon continued moving cash for suspect people and companies in the wake of deferred persecutions agreement and other big money laundering enforcement actions. 4 of those banks signed non-persecution or deferred persecution deals in the past 15 years relating to money laundering. The only bank of the 5 banks that hasn't been the subject of non or deferred persecution agreement is Deutsche Bank. Instead, it reached a $258 million civil settlement in 2015. So they go out there, they're basically right there, found out that they're doing something wrong. The bank basically says, well, we're not going to agree or disagree with anything. We're just going to basically sign the agreement that says we're not, it's nobody's fault, nobody screwed up, nobody's fault. Here is the money, go away. And the government, of course, hurting for money, says, sure, we'll take the money and just don't do it ever again. Don't do it ever again. And the bank says, no. We've never done it, but of course we would never do that. We would never do that. We're going to go actually publicly and tell everybody that we are changed. We are changing how we do business. We're never going to do this. And while, of course, they go out there and tell you and I that, hey, we're never doing this again. Of course, the people in the back room have been told, okay, just change the other 500 companies, change the other 500 banks. There's plenty of them out there. Just shift what you're doing. And by the way, if anybody's leaking stuff, let's get rid of them. So, anyways, that's basically what ends up happening. Bank of New York Mellon was amongst the first big banks to pay a large penalty to U.S. authorities for anti-money laundering failures. In 2005, 2 years before it merged with Mellon Financial, Bank of New York paid $38 million, and of course signed the non-prosecution agreement. Of course, you're going to sign that. As a trusted member, now of course this is what they go out and say to the public. This is coming out of Bank of New York Mellon. So here is what the bank said in a statement. Quote, as a trusted member of international banking community, trusted member, my foot, we fully comply with all applicable laws and regulations and assist authorities in the important work they do. No, they don't. No, they don't. One risky pattern revealed by ICIJ, which is the report and the website that I'm sharing with you, analysis of the leak records is the willingness of multiple banks to process transactions for the same risky clients. The secret record reveals Deutsche Bank shuffled more than $11 billion in transactions between 2003 and 2017 for companies that a particular Russian oligarch controlled. And of course, it goes into the story of what this person has done and kind of how the whole thing worked. John Casara, a financial crime expert who worked as a special agent assigned to FinCEN from 1996 to 2002, said that the size of the penalties paid by HSBC and other big banks may sound large, but that they're a tiny fraction of the bank's profits. And the money isn't paid by the bankers, who should be held accountable. However, it's paid by shareholders. That's right. So, when they get caught and when they have to pay, of course, they don't take their money out of their pocket. Jamie Dimon, for example, doesn't go into his personal, bank account and says, all right, we screwed up. The onus is on me. Here, I'm going to write a personal check out of my personal account to go to this and pay, and we're going to resolve this stuff. No, 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 no. They write it out of the bank's account, which of course is funded by those investing in the particular bank and hold the stocks. And of course, the stocks then take a plummet, so you get hit twice. Anyways, it's a hot mess. And at the end of the day, you and I pay and foot the bill. BNP Paribas, France's largest bank, received the biggest fine of all in 2014 when it was forced to pay $8.9 billion in the face of evidence that it helped shift billions of dollars through the U.S. financial system on behalf of Sudanese, Iranian, and Cuban entities subject to American sanction. The bank agreed to accept criminal convictions, which is really interesting because they typically don't do that, and had to force out 13 staffers. So they said, you know what, we'll take the criminal conviction and we're going to force these 13 people that are involved with it. But for the French bank, the priority in settlement negotiation was ensuring that its license to process dollar transactions in the U.S. wasn't permanently taken away. After the deal was announced, the bank's share price rose 4%. That's right, this is how the crazy world is. They went out, they said, okay, yep, you caught us, we'll take the criminal convictions, because they clearly, they didn't say, oh, just give us that. But because they were afraid they were going to use a license to the U.S. dollar, which is a big deal because U.S. dollar is used around the world to settle the bills between the banks, between the businesses, and so on, because it is a reserve currency, whether you like it or not, it's just a fact. And so what they basically were saying, okay, we'll pay this stuff, we'll eliminate these people that had stuff to do with it, we'll even accept the criminal charges, just don't take our license, please. And of course, they were able to get that, and the stock went up. Insane. Now, the Deutsche Bank employees instructed clients, so this is an interesting one that is a very, very weird, but yet it sounds to be true. Deutsche Bank employees instructed clients from Iran and other hotspots to lace their payment messages with code words that would trigger special handling. One executive urged workers to employ tricks and cunning to avoid detection by American authorities. So when you send funds, of course, you have to put in the reasons of what you're doing and stuff. And so now, not only do you get banking with this particular bank, but you also get special coaching of what to put into the documents, of what to actually say and write correctly so that you don't get flagged. so that it requires special handling, meaning it doesn't go through the regular channels to the teller like you and I have to go through, that basically says, oh, wait a minute. My report here says that if ever, certain amounts of money are taken, I got to take all of this information from you. So I'm going to need two forms of ID. I'm going to need you to sign the affidavit. I'm going to need a fingerprint. I'm going to need to take a photo of you. I'm going to need, so they have all of these different things. And by the way, come back in 5 days so that we can give you your money, right? So that's the scrutiny that you and I have to go through. But these individuals, because they have so much money, they don't deal with the regular bank tellers. They actually have a private individual or a group of individuals that they have on speed dial. These people will pick up their phones anytime, day, night, holidays, it doesn't really matter, because you are dealing, in this case scenario, with millions, if not even billions of dollars, or tens of hundreds of billions of dollars that you're trying to move around. And of course, they're going to, they're incentivized because they get a portion of the deal, right? So of course they're going to take it, and of course they're going to coach you and say, hey Bob, I gotta transfer, $50 billion from the, here to there. How do I do this? And then Bob basically, kind of says, well, you gotta fill this, like, Bob, I don't have time to do this, man. And Bob says, okay, no big deal, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. And then they actually fill it out for you, potentially, and give you stuff to do, and it just says, just sign down at the bottom. And you sign down at the bottom, and then 2 days later, you get notification that your money has been transferred. So there you go. That's basically what the tricks of the trade are. Now, in a statement, Deutsche Bank framed the deal as old news. The conduct ceased several years ago, and since then, we have been terminated all business. A month after the settlement was announced, the FinCEN files show now, Deutsche Bank was working behind the scenes to move money for a company linked to Ukrainian billionaire who U.S. prosecutors later alleged was engaged in a massive laundering scheme that funneled cash into the American heartland. So again, you see this again and again and again, where they get caught and they say, no, 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 no. I'm sorry, that was back then. But since when we've eliminated those folks, we're not doing that. We are changed people. We're a changed bank. You trust us, of course you trust us. I mean, come on, you gotta trust us. We are good guys, right? Deutsche Bank declined to answer questions, saying it was legally restricted from commenting on clients or transactions. And of course, why would they want to self-incriminate if they don't have to? The bank told ICIJ that it had acknowledged past weaknesses and learned from its mistakes. We are a different bank, it said. So there you go. That's what is happening right now, and what's been happening behind the scenes for years, that I think is incredibly important for you and I and for everybody to know and understand. When they say that crypto is used for money laundering, sure, it possibly is. But let's also face it and come down to the reality that traditional banking and cash are also equally as used for as many illicit transactions as crypto is, and maybe even more so. Because when you and I transfer money, it's not public knowledge. It lives with the bank, maybe the receiving bank, maybe the sort of the transferring bank, right? If there's multiple banks that are kind of involved in the transaction and the transfer process. But that's about it. Not everybody can go onto some sort of, website or something and see, oh, well, Nev transferred such money from this account to this account, right? But with crypto, we can do that. We go to the on-chain and we take a look. And while I don't know necessarily who's behind the account 0x123FF51, whatever, right? And that it went from this account to that account, right? I don't know that stuff. I know that that particular wallet has done that, and makes it easier to track. And of course, when that individual tries to then take a possession of it, they say, aha, okay, so the 0x1FF, whatever number I made up, that's you. We have all of these records now. Congratulations, we know what you've done. So I think that, we will see more and more of that stuff coming in. And, we'll see kind of how the whole thing is going to play out. But for me, it really just highlights when I keep saying that things are manipulated, that they're shifted, that we are being lied to consistently. This is just one of those proofs, and who knows how much more of the stuff we don't know about. Like I said, this is historic. This is what happened in the late 90s till about, early to mid 2000s. But since then, it's been about 3 years. And now Now it's even better and more lucrative to go in and take free money from the government and, of course, try to see how you can triple it. While you and I are trying to figure out how do I borrow at 2% so that I can maybe make 3% and make a spread on it, right? The big banks are saying, I will take money for free. And then I am going to allow such individuals to transfer the stuff. It's not on me. I'm going to take 20% or more off of that stuff. And then I will also work out a deal with the Fed that I don't have to pay it. And I will use shadow banking where I set up special purpose vehicles and different components where this money can make me 5 to 10x of that money all legally. Now, is it ethical? Probably not. And then if we get caught, we're going to put some money into the reserves. And at the end of the day, it's going to come out of shareholders anyways. So who cares? Well, if you do care, and if you did like this content and you have learned something, do me a huge favor, smash the like button, put the comments in, and now we're going to go into the chat, into the Q&A session for those of you watching live on OneDailyWay.com. Everybody else, thanks for watching. I will see you tomorrow, but only if you subscribe and hit the bell. Until then, stay forever money blessed, and do remember, you are only one deal away.